Well, before we get to that, you see a different background. You see me eating. There's reason for that. I'm ravenous because I tend to burn somewhere between 4,000 to 8,000 calories, depending on today. I only skied for an hour. But so I'm in Wisconsin getting ready for my race. It's a 50K skiing race. Yesterday I skied for 2 hours. Today I skied for an hour, but it was -3 Fahrenheit when I was skiing. So that's -20 Celsius. That's cold. And so that's probably burns a lot more calories. So I'm coming back on Saturday. But those of you who are interested why I'm doing this crazy thing, I'm going to post the link so you all get an idea what this is. And if you have interest in supporting the fundraiser, by all means. But before I kind of drop into the talking about the COVID, is Elise, are you here? Our chair of our AIM Health Institute. Can you tell us 2 words if you're not too busy? I don't want to put you on a spot since we were not preparing for this. Maybe she's busy. Okay, so she's here. So I'm going to add a spotlight and just unmute yourself, say hi, and whatever else you want to say, and then we'll transition to.
Hi, everybody. Misha is celebrating his 50th birthday with an incredible feat that I can't even explain, but 50 kilometers of skiing. Misha I'll ask you to describe it. And he's doing it as a fundraiser. Well, he's doing it to show us all what he's capable of and be an inspiration for all of us, but he's doing it also as a fundraiser for AIM, Access to Integrative Medicine. And it would be wonderful if you could go on to our new website and donate and further inspire and support Misha. Thank you. So Misha, do explain what it is.
Okay, it looks like Misha is frozen. So let me check and see if he put, yes, that is the link to the fundraiser. I just gave to the fundraiser. It's very easy to do. And you can do it very quickly. And if you can, please help out the fundraising app. It's one of those apps where they ask you for a little bit of money because what they offer to people who are using it, it's free. So it's about almost $3. So please consider doing that. At some point, Misha will rejoin us. There you go.
And may I donated 2,500 in support of his birthday. So anybody who wants to help match that, or if as a group we can match it, that would be awesome. But Misha, you need to describe what you're doing because I can't.
Yeah, sorry guys. I think the hotel dropped the Wi-Fi, so I'm on my hotspot. Hopefully it will hold. So yeah, so it's where did I cut off? I don't know what you guys heard.
We didn't hear anything at all.
All right, so this is the largest American ski race. It is part of the worldwide set of races that are sort of considered to be a standard scoring races. So if after doing this one, I can go anywhere in the world and get placed according to my timing. It's a special system, just like any other sports. And so I've been preparing for the last year and a half. I used to ski competitively pre-Olympic level back in Russia when I was in high school. And then I got really sick. So I had some kind of a heart problem that they couldn't figure out, and I had to drop out because this is one of the most cardiac intensive sports. In fact, some people consider cross-country skiing being the most intensive sport that you can be involved in, which I actually agree, because you're not just running, your legs are fully engaged and then your upper body fully engaged. Plus, the type of skiing I'm doing is called skating style, which is even harder because you're relying on upper body significantly more. In the Nordic Classic, where you're kind of doing like this, the hands work a lot less. So it's much more leg, but here at it's 50-50, if not 60-40, upper body, lower body. So yeah, so I've been training since Tuesday every day, anywhere between 1 to 2 hours, despite whatever the temperature is. And tomorrow I have a mock race, so wish me luck. Tomorrow I'll be doing a full 50K with a target getting under 4 hours, which will place me in top 1% of the racers for my age. You know, I don't think I'll get a lot better than that. The conditions have not been great because it's really cold, and when it's really cold, the snow is much slower. Despite the fact that I have a pretty decent equipment, it doesn't actually matter. So yeah, and as I said, I put the link to the webpage for our new webpage is up. We're very proud of it. Thank you, Lisa, for bringing this up. Yeah, the first question, I feel cold, I freeze. Yesterday, it was almost 0 degrees and a severe wind into the face, and I couldn't breathe. So I had to find my way around into trails with less wind, but I will tell you, if I wouldn't have grown up where I grew up, I think I would not have been able to do this. I just had the body memory. Body is like, yeah, it's a shock, but you can survive this. And but yesterday I had to stop early. I had a plan of 2.5 hours, but I only did 1 hour and 45 minutes because my hands are starting to get numb. So I have a couple of different sets of gloves, but I think I miscalculated yesterday. Anyway, tomorrow it's much warmer. Tomorrow it's only 20 degrees. Fahrenheit, which is nice because that's actually what I hope will be the temperature of the race, and it allows me to have less weight on me, less clothing, and also it's much easier. When the warmer the temperature, the faster the snow. So with that, I see there's a questions already in the chat, which is great. I have a couple of quick updates, and then we'll take time for questions. So there seems to be a lot of spiking of COVID, but actually more spiking of flu. So if you have, and by the way, if you ask me, should I get if I haven't had a flu vaccine, should I go get one now? Absolutely not. It's too late. By now, flu has completely mutated. You will be just wasting the shot. Usually, you have the typical protection from that original shot will not last for more than a certain couple of months, and definitely by the February that shot is already ineffective because the virus mutated. Flu virus mutates even faster than COVID, so there's no point trying to chase it with late vaccine. If you didn't get a vaccine, it's fine. You'll just get the flu, you'll get over it, and you'll be okay. But yeah, so now particularly there's some parts of the country where the spiking is heavier, but I think we're doing okay. So we're better than some of the, for some reason, it's like Kentucky is getting a big, Chicago is getting a big hit. You know, why that is, I don't know. But we still have a lot of it. Also, remember we talked about the diarrhea, infectious diarrhea last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago. That's seemingly still going around. So please do be careful if you know somebody who has this. I would suggest avoid contacting them until they recover, simply because actually that's a much more contagious virus, and especially if it's in your household, most likely you're going to get it. It's hard to avoid if the person lives with you. So yeah, okay, so and that's all I have actually. I will be doing next week a couple of really interesting things, so stay tuned. I will be discussing some of the new data on well, I'll be talking about 2 things. So I'll mention some of the new data on prevention of dementia, prevention of Alzheimer's disease, as the Lancet just published a new update of their 2017 European guideline. I actually don't trust American guidelines, so I'll just go with, all right, this is recorded. Oh, well, shouldn't have said that. It's okay. So anyway, I actually follow European guideline on dementia because I think that they have a better guidelines than us. So I'll present that. And also I had a couple of patients the last few weeks asking me about rapamycin. So I will be talking about rapamycin next week, but we're not going to have time today. And the new data on the rapamycin just come out. So we're talking about rapamycin for longevity. As you know, all of the biohackers and some of the longevity experts like Peter Attia, Dave Osprey, they're all taking rapamycin. So I'll give you my position on it next week, as well as this new study. But let's do the questions so that we give Michelle plenty of time. So let's take 4 minutes, Michelle, and you'll still have at least 25 minutes if you need to take a little extra time. All right, what do I think about the uptick in tuberculosis cases in Kansas? I didn't know about it, so I'll have to look it up. But this happens quite a bit. Usually upticks in the US occur either when somebody brings a new strain or when somehow the local medical system misses first few cases and then it starts spreading. Usually it gets controlled pretty quickly. Tuberculosis is hard to manage on an individual basis, but as a kind of a public health problem, I mean, we know how to handle it. Patients get isolated quickly, and I don't expect this to become a huge problem. Okay, the FDA recently put a warning on RSV vaccines. What did I tell you 6 months ago? You guys remember? Or a year ago? Do you remember why I do not give RSV? What I told everybody, do not get RSV vaccine? That's why, because I've seen that signal in the original study they didn't bring up. When FDA approved RSV, based on that study, there was a 3-fold increase in Guillain-Barré. And I kind of said, until post-market data comes out, I'm not giving it to most of my patients, only to those who are at the super high risk, like people with severe COPD or asthma. That's why. So Guillain-Barré can kill you. Most of the time it doesn't, but it often puts people in a permanent paralysis. It's bad disease. It's way worse than RSV itself by a mile. Percent of people who end up with a severe long-term consequences is somewhere between probably 10 to 30%. Most people will recover completely, but there is a significant proportion of people who will never recover. They'll either have some partial paralysis or a complete paralysis if they survive. So my recommendation is the same. Do not get this vaccine. I don't care how old you are, unless you have severe lung problem like COPD, asthma, or you're very immune compromised, like let's say, organ transplant on immune suppressant, or something like advanced cancer on chemotherapy, things like this. But those are very specific situations. If you're not into any of those situations, no change in my recommendation against CDC and everybody else. So, and I'm not afraid of saying this because I actually read the literature and I analyze the studies myself. I don't rely on the public opinion, and then I share my opinion with you based on my knowledge. And I'm not afraid of that because I've seen CDC wrong so many times. I just don't trust them at all. All right. Well, thank you, Janet, for the new study on turmeric. I haven't seen that yet. Makes perfect sense. Is this why are you posting this? Is this somebody we know who published this?
No, well, I get Dr. Mark Heyman's newsletter, and that was one of the items. And we are fans of curcumic here.
Yeah, we are.
And
sure are.
We've talked about it numerous times, but I just thought I'd share that.
Mm-hmm. Anything to do if you got RSV vaccine back before your advice? Well, no, right? Because you've probably now gotten it a long time ago. I don't think that at this. Usually, the data for GBS, Guillain-Barré, is as short as GBS. Usually, it happens within few weeks, somewhere between a couple of weeks up to maybe 3 months in total. If that hasn't happened by this point, and that was the major side effect in that original study that the feds used for the approval of the vaccine. There was some other stuff, but I didn't pay much attention because it's such a, you have to keep an eye on total percentage of cases. So if you have a 3-fold increase over the background and they dismissed it because quote unquote statistically not significant. So this is the fallacy of a science currently, right? it wasn't statistically significant, but think of it this way. You thinking about condition that has about 5 to 10% mortality rate, if not recognized in time. So even if you have just a couple of extra cases in a set of few hundred, like 500 patients roughly, you have to sort of, you can't ignore it. You can't just say, statistically not significant, so we're, but that tells you something. That tells you that, and look, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, and I read that study in 5 minutes, and I'm like, this is a problem here. It took me 5 minutes to figure that out. Now imagine we're talking about a FDA panel that has 5 experts at least, sometimes more, that are specific researchers who know how to read these studies. You know what that tells you? They've knew this. They still approved it despite that. They approved this knowing that there are gonna be serious problems, and because the way they think about this, okay, well, we're gonna save this amount of lives. Sure, you're gonna save this amount of lives, but you didn't tell that to the public. Nope. I mean, when they approved it, they said there was no risk of side effect. I mean, read the approval. You can go back in it. So we'll see what happens. Are they going to roll it back? No, they won't. So, all right. Well, it's 1:22. So if you have questions, hold them to next time. And Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's remove my spotlight and please let
I'm
us.
going to share my presentation. Can you see that okay? Great.
It's great.
Excellent. So I'm Michelle. You heard a little bit about me, and I'm so excited to be here to talk about birth. I have a lot to say on it because for the last 10 years, I've been with women and birthing people alongside them as they literally birth. And, midwives consider themselves a protector of birth and these rebirths that happen throughout our whole life cycle. So I consider birth a state of being. And throughout my experience sitting with folks and catching babies, I've been humbled by how I see birth everywhere in the literal sense and also in the abstract sense. So I'm happy to chat a little bit about it and hopefully hear what you all think. So some goals from this talk today. I really hope after this presentation, it encourages you to explore birth as this conscious experience. I hope you begin or continue, if you are already in this stage, of challenging traditional narratives around birth and how we birth. And I hope you start and continue to examine the connection between birth, death, and our consciousness. And of course, I hope after this discussion, it encourages continued mindfulness and reflection. So birth is beyond biological. It's considered the first awakening of consciousness. It's a universal human experience. We have all been birthed, regardless of if we are going to physically birth a human. We have been touched by birth in some way or another. I find it very touching that if you ask folks about if they know their birth story or how they were born or how their personal birth was, it's really amazing how much you can get from a story like that. And it's also profound how willing most people are to talk about this transformational experience. And the moment of birth marks the transition from non-being to being, shaping our perception and existence. And it's the ultimate conscious experience from an existential and spiritual perspective. And it shapes our understanding of life and society. And you'll hear me say this a lot, but some of the questions I always ask myself and in general is how we birth, who we birth, and where we birth matters. And it shapes everything that we do. It shapes our politics, it shapes our economy, it affects the individual, it affects the community. So it's really powerful. And it's really interesting to see, for those who don't know much about birth in the States, right now, it's not looking good for us. We're pretty low on when you look at the morbidity and mortality in birthing folks here in the US, we're among the lowest of the industrialized countries. Most folks are birthing in the hospital setting, and midwives only really account for about 10% of the births here in the US. And for those who are not familiar with midwives, ancient profession has been around forever, really utilized a lot more in the UK, in Scandinavia, in Europe, Australia, not utilized much in our healthcare system. But the evidence shows that midwives really help protect physiological birth. Having a midwife increases your risk for, or decreases your risk for cesarean, increases your risk, your chances of having an uncomplicated vaginal delivery. Lots of evidence on increase in satisfaction around birth experience. So, but we have a lot to go, a lot to advance here in the States with regards to birth outcomes. But anyway, when I talk about birth, it's beyond just actually giving birth. I would hope that even if you don't have an experience of actually birthing a human, that you can apply these concepts to any major transformation that you've experienced in your life. But I do want to talk about specific dimensions of birth, and this is kind of how I view it in my mind. There's a physical aspect to birth. It's a state of profound physical transformation. There's constant cellular regeneration that's happening during birth, during the actual process of being pregnant and giving birth. You lose a ton of blood during birth. And then in that whole year following birth, your body is regenerating all of its red blood cells. It's creating milk to sustain life. There's also a really great image that I always think about is after the baby is born and still there's this moment, it's still connected to the placenta through the umbilical cord. The placenta is still attached to mom or the birthing person, and it is just pumping out life force, stem cells, blood, and it's just so beautiful. It's a reminder, the whole concept of birth is such a reminder of our ever-changing physical form, which is happening constantly. Another dimension of birth is the mental aspect, mental emotional. It's a continuous expansion through ideas, experiences, and realizations. Evidence has shown us that during profound transformations in our life, the neurons are actually regenerating and making new pathways, creating new ways of thinking. We're outgrowing our old beliefs, adopting new perspectives, and we're continuously reshaping who we are. From a spiritual dimension, maybe arguably the most important, ancient traditions has always viewed birth as a sacred threshold between realms. You'll hear folks who are in birth work talk about the thin space that is really palpable during the birthing process. Midwives have always felt very protective of the physical birthing space, as well as the mental and emotional energy that's surrounding the birthing person and all those involved. We spend a lot of time, although not even enough, in our visits leading up to birth, trying to focus on not just the physical aspect of this transition, but the importance of the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspect. And hopefully, encouraging mindfulness practices throughout this process. In Hinduism, birth is considered the beginning of karmic cycles and spiritual potential. And according to Buddhist philosophers, birth is the first moment of awareness. It's a sacred and present experience. It's an opportunity to awake to deeper truths about ourselves and the world, and we'll constantly reflect on this throughout our life cycle. Again, a cyclical process of death and rebirth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's an opportunity to shed illusions and step into new layers of our own awareness. So if you've ever been at a birth, and if you've also ever been at a death, if you ask people about their experiences, it's pretty impressive how similar birth and death can be. And it's no surprise that in ancient times, midwives often were both at the birth and the death of members of the community. One of the tenets of our care is to kind of protect the physiological natural processes of birth. And in terms of death, there is actually physiological natural process of death that should be protected as well. And it's pretty amazing to see how both processes mirror each other in many ways when left undisturbed. Ancient philosophers considered birth and death the bookends of existence. I love that, which frame our human consciousness. Birth considered as this entry, and death considered a return to greater consciousness. And this is constantly happening throughout our life. Constant opportunities for rebirth, and mindfulness teaches us to embrace both these bookends, the birth and the death, as profound interconnected experiences that we are all experiencing simultaneously. And I love this image. This is an ancient portrayal of this cycle. You see folks entering into the home, and in the bottom portion here, you see these two people welcoming three people, new life into the world. And up top, folks are surrounding a person that's entering into their death. And another familiar image is this phoenix rising from the ashes, this concept of new birth and transcendence and opportunity to really transform ourselves through these maybe painful, intense experiences. So I argue that birth has a way to unite all humans in this shared experience of awakening. It's this beginning of consciousness that happens at birth that actually mirrors this process of enlightenment, emerging from the dark into light. And again, we have these opportunities throughout our life, throughout major events and crises. We have this opportunity through mindfulness, through staying centered, to emerge from dark into light. And how we approach birth reflects how we approach life. We can choose to enter into fear or presence. We can choose resistance or acceptance. And to round this out, birth is a time, it is a moment in time that can be incredibly painful. We've talked about how it can be transformative, an intense experience that requires us to be present. And when we see folks that are entering into birth, whether literally or figuratively, when they haven't been able to spend time to prepare their body, their mind, and their spirit for these transitions, we see literal dystocias in labor because of this. We literally see fetal heart rate decelerations and changes in the heart rate when we see that the birthing person isn't able to be centered, whether they feel unsafe, whether they don't feel heard, whether they're scared, or if there's some sort of triggering event that's happening. So it's really an opportunity to be able to understand how important the practice of staying present can really transform a hard experience into something beautiful. So it teaches us how to approach major life transitions with awareness and acceptance. And mindfulness practices help us remain present and connected. And not only can it support us have this conscious birth, this really profound experience, but it can help ease the transitions of other things like aging, personal crises, growth, and even the death and dying process. So I'll stop here, and I'd love any feedback or questions or comments that anyone might have.
Now, I'm curious, was anybody here in the meeting delivered by a midwife? Or did anybody here use a midwife when they had their child or their children?
I did on both of my babies. This is
Yeah.
Dr. Andrew.
And same with us.
Hey,
Both of my boys had midwives at the Shady Grove Hospital, even though both were delivered through C-section with the doctors. But you can't predict those things.
So one of the things that Michelle has been very correct, I don't want to say politically correct, but she's been very conservative in that she hasn't explained to you why the United States is so backwards when it comes to midwifery. So y'all, basically it's the male OBGYNs, or really at that time, just physicians decided, hey, we can make money off of delivering babies. And this was in the early 1900s, right? Or was it the late 1800s?
Early 1900s.
Early 1900s. So they decided, hey, we can make money off of this. Let's make it so we're the only ones who do this. And they made a concentrated effort to basically badmouth, denigrate, and get rid of the midwifery profession. So that will explain to you why we are a little behind when it comes to this amazing profession. Okay, I'm done. I'll get off my soapbox. So does anybody have any questions for Michelle?
I have a question, Irene. Was there any improvement in the increase of babies being kept alive after the medical profession took over? Do we have any data? Because it would seem that they did have a role. Not to say that I totally know what you're saying about eliminating midwives, as getting rid of them, but it seems to me that there would be an increase in live births and decreased mortality in births.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question on how to frame it. I think if you look at the graph, you absolutely will see some increases in people surviving in the surviving childbirth with the dawn of the actual hospital unit. And then at some point, we actually stopped to see that the graph kind of, you see an increase in survival, and then it kind of plateaus. And for the first time over the past however many years, 10 years, we're actually seeing a little bit of that decline. That's really powerful. And then if you Google where we are on the, international, morbidity and mortality, we're pretty low, which is really interesting because we use some of the most technological advancements and interventions in pregnancy. And we have some of the poorest outcomes, again, among the industrial world. So of course, in terms of advancements in sanitation and suturing and things like that, the hospital brought, or people who are super high risk, I think that's actually a great place for people to go. But there are a ton of folks who are not high risk, who perhaps don't belong in that same setting. And right now, the US doesn't differentiate between those two. So there's more evidence now in terms of, birth center birth, other places to birth, and the advantages to that over a hospital. And we're starting to learn more about that. And it's really interesting. There's a whole science, even just about how the labor and delivery unit is structured, increases the closer the actual labor room is to the OR, increases your chance of C-section the closer it is. So it's really fascinating. And I work very closely in the hospital setting with my physician colleagues, and there are supportive collaborative practices. GW used to have a huge, really well-known practice in the DMV. Things have changed since for lots of different reasons, but in DC, the DMV is really heavily saturated with midwives and birthing options, and it's home to one of the longest standing birth centers in Alexandria. So really amazing, the history of midwifery in the DMV, but it's just so interesting to see how we can improve and what we can do better. But anyway, yes, my physician colleagues were all essential. I think midwives, because I'm one of them, I think we have a lot to offer. And I think that also, you know, our training is one of the biggest differences between our physician colleagues. We are trained to really integrate patient preference into everything that we do. We also consider pregnancy not a pathologic event, but something that's really normal, a physiological process. And a tenet of our care is judicious use of intervention, right, when necessary. And I think that is a profound statement. In the hospital setting, it's really hard to utilize or not utilize intervention because it's everywhere. It's a lot easier to be a bit choosy about what you use and what you don't do, how often you touch a patient when you're out of the hospital. There's just something about being there, and also politics and policies that just continuously make you intervene a natural process. And for most of us, the WHO says that for about 85% of folks, if you just let them gestate and birth, they're good. They're good. So they guess around 10% should be the natural cesarean rate. And right now in US hospitals, like the one I work at, sometimes they have a 40% C-section rate. That's not great.
No.
National average is about 30% right now in the US.
Okay.
And that's significant. And there's tremendous implications to having major abdominal surgery. It is a life-saving surgery, and it is important, and it is well done. But do 30–40% of our population need to do that? I would say no.
Yeah. Very good answer. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the lack of training among the doctors for doing the kind of births that were difficult but handled for vaginal birth in the past and now are where they resort to C-sections?
It's so interesting. And I think so much is just where someone's done their training and what they've seen. And I'm really committed to that statement. For example, I've worked alongside folks, midwives or doctors, who are unfazed by anything. And they really love birth and consider it mostly normal. And it's really amazing. And I've met other folks, midwife, physician, doesn't matter, who are absolutely terrified of birth and everything that goes along with it. And so the way they're going to engage with the process is going to be so different. A really interesting concept is like breech birth, for instance. I would say it's a dying art. Most folks, practitioners now, providers, I'll just say providers across the board, they don't know how to do breech. They weren't taught in school because we don't do them anymore. So when that person comes in laboring with a breech baby, mostly no one knows what to do. Some of us are more familiar and feel more comfortable. And it's also, because it's considered more dangerous, no one knows how to do it. And is that the danger part? That we don't know how to do it? And so that we just kind of move towards C-section. But there are some folks, especially our international providers that come over, they have more familiarity with breech and maybe consider it a variation of normal. And so you'll see them, sure, if someone comes in breech, let's do it. We got this. And then this person has this like profound vaginal breech delivery, which is unheard of here in the States. So I think it's a lot to do with what you're exposed to. I feel really lucky at GW where I trained. I worked alongside physician colleagues. I helped train the residents and medical students and vice versa. And so they grew up knowing midwifery, seeing us catch babies in crazy positions on hands and knees in the tub. It was a normal day for everyone. So I'm sure as they go into their profession, they're going to be really unfazed if they see someone on hands and knees birthing their baby or squatting on a toilet. Whereas someone who's never seen that before, and most folks haven't, they're going to look terrified and they're going to lose it.
Just a little short narrative. I was born at home and my mother didn't get to the hospital. She delivered me 2 hours after the water broke. And my father came in and he worked, he is an agronomist and worked with cattle all his life and had gone through numerous births. So my father delivered me. He learned how to do it from delivering cattle.
Isn't that, I
Isn't
mean,
that incredible? And my father and I always had a special relationship.
yeah, it's pretty
Thank
amazing.
you.
Someone asked the reason that there's a big discrepancy between white and Black women mortality rates during birth, besides obvious gaslighting, and is anyone studying this? Beyond gaslight, well, yes, definitely folks are studying it, and we know that the more diversity we have in our providers, the better outcomes that we're going to have. So I know among the midwifery community, we've been pushing legislation that integrates different types of midwives and gets them licensure so that we actually have more midwives for more options, and that folks can become midwives in different ways, not just the standard traditional route that maybe I took. That could be, that can pose an obstacle to someone who might want to become a midwife. So I also think that there is racism that exists in our healthcare system that's very profound. And there's lots and lots of studies about that, implicit bias, all of those things. And it is our duty as providers to be really self-aware and continuously educate ourselves, and also provide opportunities, again, to diversify, like for me, midwives in our profession. So they all aren't just, white women.
This is Salome. Just for my interest, this might be outside of your topic. What's the difference between a midwife and, a midwife and a doula?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a doula is non-medical and emotional support person that will be with the person throughout their whole labor. And they're certifying bodies to become a professional doula. But here in the States, in other places, it might be very common for everyone in the family to surround the birthing person. Here in the States, it's a little bit different. You might not have anyone in your room but your partner for most of the time that you're birthing. You might have a nurse come in sporadically. You might have your provider come in when it's time to push the baby out. It can be a very isolating experience. It is not ideal, and it probably is not how someone should birth. So in comes the doula, who is this integral part of the birthing team, who is knowledgeable about labor support, emotional, physical, and mental, but will not be a part of the actual they have no, they wouldn't be liable, and they're not involved in any of the actual medical aspects of the birth. They also help folks with shared decision making. In some places, let's say there's not a midwife and it might be someone else, the doulas can act as kind of a middle person to help navigate some hard decisions for folks who might not really be feeling safe in that environment. And there is research, studies have shown that if you have a doula, you're more likely to experience a vaginal delivery, less pain reported, and better birth experiences. So they're valuable. A nurse midwife or midwife is going to be the person who is going to be in charge and managing the actual care for the patient. In DC, in Virginia and Maryland, nurse midwives, those are midwives who were previously nurses and have additional degrees, have independent practice, which means that they are just independent practitioners, and they write prescriptions, they do suturing. Some of us do first assist if someone needs a C-section. Yeah, so we're more helping manage the actual labor, and we're actually physically catching the babies.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was thinking of nurse midwives too, so you kind of explained it. Thank you. I was born at home.
All right.
All of us are born at home.
I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to intervene here and say, Michelle, it looks like this was one of the most amazing presentations because they still have questions for you. So I have a feeling maybe you can come back at some point in the future.
Oh, I'd love to. And feel free to anyone wants to contact and chat. Jeanette has heard this. The concept of this presentation stems from a class I'm developing for the School of Public Health that's going to look at this birth from a philosophical lens. So I'd appreciate any feedback too. Thank you so much, though.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's we have very little time, but that's okay. So let's just do this. So I'm gonna okay, so there we go. So let's all center here. I think I actually would like us to, instead of talking about this, to continue this topic in a way. I think we can do a little bit of a short practice based on what we've just heard. I suggest that first, let's just center, make sure you're comfortable, keep your back upright, close your eyes. I think it'll go easier if we remove the stimulation. And I think we all can first tune into our breathing, just to make sure that we settle and that we beginning to drop from our heads into our bodies a little bit more. Okay, so if you're comfortable, I'd like us all to sense where in our bodies are we sensing this conversation. Is there any particular place that feels in resonance with this conversation? All of us have been through this experience of birth. If you're here, it means you've been born. And I think tapping into the body wisdom to sense what's communicated to us is in all of our capacities. And it doesn't mean you'll have to be specific here, but I think it's useful to sense the moment of birth through our physical presentation now. And especially if you feel that there's been something unresolved from the past. The reason I brought this up is when I was born, my mom was dying on a table, and so they pulled me out through the C-section. They broke my leg because they had to do it quickly. And when Michelle was presenting, I had a strange physical sensation of my right leg being in pain. And then I recalled that they broke my right leg when they pulled me out. Now I don't have any consequences physically, but now I realize that there could be deeper inner consequences of that feeling of, a shock. And more importantly, of course, my mom was on the verge of dying. And so they had to save her. They did save her and she was fine. But, obviously I witnessed that on some level. So stay tuned to your own sensations. Continue the breathing. And just become aware if there's any message or any communication or any state of awareness that comes to you. And maybe there is nothing. Maybe you're just breathing and you're just being aware of this conversation. You've been aware of the importance of this topic. And I think that's enough too. But if there's something more, feel free to take a few minutes to explore it. You can ask specific questions of your own body as to why you're feeling this. You can also connect to something greater and see if there's other types of download that's happening. whatever happening, if you, like, I'm feeling a lot of tension right now, not just in the leg, but in my face and like everywhere. So if you're sensing that, you don't have to do anything about it. I just suggest you continue breathing and you make a conscious effort to relax any part of your body that responds to this with attention. Begin to slowly come back. I want to make sure that we have a few minutes at the end for anybody to share anything, because I think it's such a profound topic that I don't want us to, if anybody needs to say something, I don't want us to make sure we, and it's not questions, it's just if you have to share something or maybe you want to put something in the chat. Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for sharing this.
Welcome.
Yeah, so I think, Michelle, maybe that's the topic for next time, the birth trauma. And maybe we can bring a mind-body expert who works with that. We have two at the clinic, so we could try to coordinate. Did you want to say something before I give Stephanie the floor?
No, thank you.
Steph, you have your hands up.
So I know I've been in communication with you, Dr. Kogan, but I feel like this is like the Phoenix rebirth happening right now. I also have birth trauma where my mom similarly almost died when I was born. Now, while I'm doing a very deep like physical, emotional, and spiritual detox. And this coincides with the 5-year anniversary of when I first got COVID in January of 2020. And prior to that, I actually had attempted suicide 6 years ago in February. And through the help of Dr. Kogan over the past few years, both locally in DC and from afar, in Florida right now, I've been unpacking just, my whole life. And I'm about to fly up to DC tomorrow and start working with an AIM grant related to EDS. I had never been diagnosed with this before, but I feel it like in my spirit that this is what I've been living with and trying to cope with on my own. And so I feel very free in this moment. Thank you very profoundly.
Thank you, Steph. So I know we're at the hour, but I still want to make sure that everybody who needed to say something or chat something can do that. Yeah, so Jennifer, I'm not surprised. Like I had to hold my tears because I was presenting, I don't think that would have went well if I would have started sobbing, but I had the same feeling, like when I started thinking what I'm gonna, because I had a completely different plan for the presentation for the mind body, but then it shifted to this. So I think there's a lot more to our births that we could and probably should explore. I think there's a deep untapped capacity for not just understanding, but also probably for a much deeper level of healing. So I want to acknowledge that. Well, thank you, everybody. Michelle, special thank you. I also feel like it's wonderful we planned it this way, because a few weeks ago we had Chris who talked about death. And so today we talked about birth. So I think it's very, very well planned. Everybody give kudos to Janet for organizing things so well. So Janet's going to stop recording. Actually, I probably can do that myself. So I'll stop recording now. And if you